Welcome to Average Joe's Pool. Are you after a new pool cue but you're on a super tight budget? Well, if you've been looking on Amazon, chances are you've already come across this cue. But is it worthy of your hard-earned money? Let's find out as we investigate the Viper Graphstrike. So when it comes to cheap pool cues, without question, the Viper brand is one of the strongest contenders in the marketplace. And the Viper brand is owned by GLD Products, who were set up in 1981 and are based out of Milwaukee in the USA. However, all of their pool cues are manufactured in China. And when it comes to pool cues, the Viper brand produces several different types of pool cues, including what we have here. This is a composite pool cue, actually manufactured from graphite and fiberglass. And so to celebrate the materials that this particular cue is made from, Viper have called this model the Graphstrike. And with regards to options for the Graphstrike, these are available in 3 different colours. They come in black, blue, or what we have here, red. And with regards to weight options, there's only actually one weight option available, which of course is precisely what we have here, and we don't know what that is, but we suspect it should be 19 ounces. And when it comes to warranties, GLD Products offer a 90-day warranty on their Viper cues. If you want more information on that, be sure to check out their website. And when it comes to price, that's definitely one of the most attractive factors when it comes to the Viper Graphstrike. This cue is currently just $39.99 on Amazon. And if you are interested in buying one of these, we will be adding Amazon links into the video description. So if you like what we do here at Average Joe's Pool, or this video ends up being helpful for you, please be sure to help support us in return and be sure to use our Amazon links. So now we know the basics about the Viper Graphstrike, let's delve in a little bit deeper. Let's take a look at the Spec Check.
Anyway, we're going up to Dahlberg's bus to bug him for a while. Yeah.
When it comes to packaging, this is one of Viper's strong points because most of their cues actually come in a soft case. And with regards to design on the Graphstrike, we have a red metallic paintwork complete with a high gloss lacquer finish. And unusually that paintwork is not reserved only for the butt but also for the shaft as well, which seems to be one of the features when it comes to these composite style cues. When it comes to materials, these composite cues are made from a combination of fiberglass and graphite rather than the more traditional wood. And this combination of materials is meant to be far less susceptible to changes in temperature or humidity, and therefore make these cues apparently almost warp proof. Now, apart from the metallic paintwork, the design that we have here is fairly simple. We do have an aluminium joint here with a decorative ring on either side, and additionally we do have a Veltex black wrap. And with regards to logos on the Graphstrike, we have the Viper logo down here at the end of the butt, and we also have a Graphstrike logo towards the joint. So let's take a quick look at the shaft that we have on this cue. As I mentioned before, as you can see, the entire shaft is also painted to match the butt. And the first 5 to 6 inches are finished in lacquer and the rest is unlacquered. Now the profile is described by Viper as being a pro taper. And it does have a pro style taper, but it does come in quite a long way before it actually levels off. You only got this bit here, which is fairly level. There's quite a lot of meat still remaining in this central section, which you wouldn't see on a better pro taper. So pro taper, yes, but not the best. Moving down to the end of the cue, we have a white plastic ferrule measured in at 25.59 millimeters. And for the tip, this is a Viper compacted leather tip, stated as 13 millimeters. When we measured in 12.7 millimeters. And when it comes to the length on our Viper Graphstrike, the overall length was 58 and 7/16 inches. And if we minus away from that total length both the tip and the butt cap, then what we have here is just a smidge, about 1/8 of an inch under 58. And our overall length comprised of a shaft length of 29 and 3/8 inches and a butt length of 29 and 1/8 inches. And with regards to diameters, at the butt here 29.5 millimeters and at the shaft here measured in at 20.22 millimeters. When it comes to weight, as we mentioned before, we're not sure what this cue should actually be. We assume it should be 19 ounces. And when we weighed this, came in pretty close to that, 18.855 ounces. And that comprised of a butt weight of 16.06 ounces, plus a shaft weight of 2.8 ounces. And when we open up the butt of the cue to have a look to see if there's a weight bolt in there, there's no weight at all in this cue. And also, strangely enough, we found at the end of the cue that it was actually constructed from wood. Similar cues that we've seen in the past, when you open up the rear of the cue, you can see that they are completely man-made. When you do it on this one, it's definitely 100% wood. And when it comes to the centre of balance, this is definitely a very rear heavy cue. This came in just a hair under 14.5 inches measured from the rear of the cue, including the butt cap, which actually places the centre of balance within the grip. So now we know all of the nitty-gritty when it comes to the Viper Graphstrike, but of course we need to start testing this cue, starting with the technical tests. It's time to test our Viper for straightness, and in addition to a basic visual inspection, we have 3 straightness tests in store. So let's make a start with the good old-fashioned table roll test. And we can see immediately before even starting the test that this cue definitely has an offset weight balance issue of some kind. And as we start rolling the cue, the weight issue is quite apparent, and you can actually hear it during the roll. Yeah, a lot of wobble there. So that's really not a great start. So let's move on to a tougher test, the rail roll test. And this test is simple. We watch the tip for wobble whilst the cue is rolled along the solid rail of the table. And even before testing, we can see just how much flexibility and bounce we have in this shaft. And as we roll, we are picking up a bit of vibration from the flex. But more importantly, we can very clearly see a fair amount of wobble. So let's throw things into overdrive with our toughest test and get the cue onto the ball-bearing cue rollers. And with nowhere left to hide, we can see the Graphstrike straightness in all its glory. And we do have a more than considerable amount of wobble at the tip. And as the roller is moved up to the middle of the shaft, you can see wobble at both the tip and joint area. And as the roller is moved up to the front, the tip wobble is eliminated and we can see the bend in all its glory. Now, remembering the lower price point of the cue, what we're seeing here is a little more than we consider acceptable. We've definitely seen worse, but we also expect better, scoring the Graphstrike a sorry 2 stars out of 5 for straightness.
Now.
Gucci, really?
Yes.
So coming up soon we have play testing, but first of all let's take a look at deflection with the squirt test. And for this test we use a distance of 75 inches, which is the distance between the head spot and the rear rail on a 9-foot table. And we use full parallel English with a hard shot. And we repeat this at least 10 times on both sides to ensure an accurate average. And the Graphstrike did poorly in this test, with an average distance of 3 1/4 inches, which places it very much in under average territory. So with our technical test now completed, we need to move on to the more practical side of testing and run our play tests. And here at Average Joe's Pool, we always ensure that we give every product that we review a minimum of 5 hours use on the table before formulating an opinion to make sure we can be fair and accurate. So let's find out exactly how much bite this Viper has. Let's play. So when it comes to performance, how did the Viper Graphstrike perform? Well, the simple answer, unfortunately, is poorly. The main issue for the Graphstrike is that this cue is just so stiff and hard in its hit. It's a very unforgiving hit and gives you very, very little feedback. The sensation that you get when hitting with this cue is so stiff, it's not unlike the feeling you would expect if you were literally to hit those balls around with a broomstick. Now, without question, one of the main factors when it comes to the really hard and stiff feel of this cue is down to the tip. Now, the tip on this cue is described as a Viper leather tip, but it really is super, super hard. So when you're actually striking the cue ball, the noise that this cue makes is horrible. You get that proper thunk noise, almost as if you're playing with a phenolic tip. But of course, what we're meant to have here is a leather tip. And as a consequence of this cue having that very hard and unforgiving hit, it's very hard to judge some of the finer shots, especially soft shots. And I found myself on several occasions trying to tap the ball as lightly as possible and it running off twice as far as I would expect it to. So for a cue for actually playing pool with, this is certainly far, far from perfect. It's very unresponsive, very unforgiving, and far too hard and stiff. And in addition to that, as if that wasn't bad enough, we also have the fact that we have this painted shaft. It seems to me that painted shafts are a terrible idea. When it comes to higher end cues, you will never find one that has a painted shaft. And the problem that this throws up is the simple fact that the paint is far too grippy whilst it's running through your bridge hand. Now, I usually play with a pool glove, but even with the pool glove, this was definitely still too grippy. And if you were to use this without a glove, I really don't know how you could practically do that and still be accurate, because it really does grab at your skin. And another factor on this cue that I really didn't appreciate was this Veltex grip. Now, we have reviewed other budget cues in the past that also have the Veltex grip. However, Veltex is usually fairly grippy, but the one that we have here is particularly slippery. And the final thing that definitely throws this off for performance is the simple fact that it's so rear weighted. And that factor can definitely throw off your game because the overall balance of this cue just simply doesn't feel right. Now, I really don't like ripping pool cues apart, especially when they are a budget orientated product such as this. We shouldn't expect the world. But at the end of the day, we do need a pool cue that's actually capable of playing pool, and we have reviewed other pool cues at similar price points to this one that are far, far superior. So unfortunately, this has fallen far short of the mark. So were there any positives with regards to performance when it comes to the Viper Graphstrike? Well, I would say that unfortunately, the only real plus point when it comes to this cue, that its characteristics of having that hard, almost phenolic style tip and very stiff characteristics lend itself to actually being pretty good when it comes to breaks. But breaks aside, when you actually want to play pool with this cue, which is exactly what it's meant to be designed for, you're going to be disappointed. So taking all of that into account, let's go ahead and score the Viper Graphstrike for performance. Unfortunately, the experience of playing with the Viper Graphstrike can only be described as a miserable one. The cue is very stiff and unresponsive. And just to make matters even worse, the painted shaft prevents the cue from sliding easily between the fingers. What we have here is a cue that can really only disappoint, scoring it a deservedly miserable 1 star out of 5 for performance. So when it comes down to features, we have to remember that what we have here is definitely a budget orientated cue. So we're not going to have all that many bells and whistles. Now, it should be said that some of the features that we do have here aren't necessarily of the best quality, but we're going to cover that in just a second. But as far as basic features go, we have our red metallic paint finish, which is also repeated on the shaft. And then we have our leather tip and a mild pro taper. And additionally, we have the aluminium joint complete with the decorative rings and also the Veltex grip. So that's really about it. What we do have here is a fairly simple cue. Another plus point, of course, is the fact that we do get that free soft case. So although it may not be the most feature-packed cue in the world, you do have to remember it is a cheap cue. So let's go ahead and score it for features. The Graphstrike does have some decent features on paper, but perhaps two of its biggest features actually work against it. Firstly, this is a cue made from composite materials rather than wood, and it's definitely not a plus point in reality. And the painted shaft again is simply an outright daft idea. Some of the features here clearly do not work as an advantage for the cue, but it is well spec'd for the price. So we'll award it a middle of the road 2.5 stars out of 5 for features.
Why is this happening?
So when it comes to quality, unfortunately, the Viper Graphstrike is an absolute stinker. But that said, this should not really be considered as a representation of all of Viper's products. We have reviewed other Viper products in the past that are more traditional construction, not this composite construction, and they are in a completely different league to what we have here with the Graphstrike. And it should be said that Viper actually makes some really good quality budget cues. This is not one of them. So where to start when it comes to quality? Well, unfortunately, pretty much everything about this is subpar. The metallic red paintwork itself looks okay, but the varnish that you've got over the top, again, is very poor quality. When you shine it in the light, you get that kind of slightly orange peel effect. And that varnish has continued down onto the end of the shaft here, the last 5 or 6 inches. However, it doesn't have a nice crisp line like you might expect to normally see. Instead, it's just kind of lazily feathered out. All of the transitions between the components are really poor. You can feel pretty much everything when you run your nail across these. Absolutely terrible. And on the joint itself, it's actually gone very patchy. It would appear that what we have here is kind of overspray from the varnish. And moving down to the end of the cue, again, the transition between the ferrule, you can feel it pretty much all the way around. It's a little bit smoother on the tip, but the transition from the shaft to the ferrule, very rough. And coming back to the joint for just a second, what we have here is some very lazy manufacturing. Now what you can see on either side of our joint here, about 1 inch or so there, and about 3/4 of an inch on this side, they've actually turned it down to meet the joint size requirement. But instead of taking it down nice and smoothly, feathering out, instead you've got that distinct line where it comes along and then it almost dips down at the end, almost like it's crushed in the center. It comes along and then dips to make sure that it meets the diameter of the joint in the center. And it does that on both sides of the joint. So it looks like someone's literally crushed it in the middle. It goes slightly inwards to meet the joint. Very lazy and poor workmanship. And when you actually undo the cue and you have a look at the insert that's in the end of the shaft there, you can see again just how bad that workmanship is. This is completely off center. And likewise, when you remove the butt cap and have a look there, again the hole that's in the center there is off center. And as you run your finger around the edge, you can feel completely that rubber butt cap there is not in the center of that butt. And also, speaking of the butt, we have this sticker on here, which is a non-peelable sticker. So all you do is when you try and remove it, the corners start to rip away. So you're going to be left with a horrible looking barcode sticker on the end of your cue. But what about the grip, I hear you say? Well, unfortunately, this is a Veltex grip, but this one is particularly slippery. I don't know why. The Veltex grips that I've tested in the past are actually quite effective and are quite grippy, whereas this one for some reason is particularly slippery. So were there any positives with regards to quality when it comes to the Viper Graphstrike? Well, unfortunately, the simple answer to that is no. It appears to be a badly made cue that's made from subpar and cheap components. So unfortunately what we have here is far from being a winner. So with that car crash result in mind, let's go ahead and score this for quality. When it comes to quality, the Graphstrike is a complete failure. Virtually everything on the cue has issues, and this is easily one of the worst quality cues we've ever come across. But do remember that thankfully this model is not representative of Viper's usual quality standard, and whichever factory is producing these Graphstrikes really needs to rethink its entire reason for existence. Do give up your day job. This really is a bad pool cue, and should consider itself lucky to score half a star out of 5 for quality. Is it possible to be any worse? We hope not, but you never know. Well, you would think that at just $40 the Graphstrike must represent decent value for money. And perhaps it would if it weren't so very, very bad in almost every aspect. If, for some strange reason, you have your heart set on a composite construction cue, then the main rival for this would be the GSE. And we reviewed the GSE recently, and it's available to buy on Amazon for the same price as the Graphstrike. And although it also has notable imperfections, it is a far superior cue to play with than the Graphstrike. However, our recommendation would be to set aside composite construction cues and take a look at more traditional wooden construction models. And when you do, just for a few extra dollars, you can get cues that are in a completely different league to our Graphstrike. Our current top recommendations that we've already reviewed would be the ASKA L2 at $50, which plays a very decent game. And also Viper's very own Underground series, which is also a great budget cue at $50. And if you're not too fussy on which cosmetic design you go for, you can often pick them up on Amazon for as low as $40, which is exactly the same price as the Graphstrike, but for a cue that is infinitely better. There's simply nothing to recommend when it comes to the Viper Graphstrike. Yes, $40 is pretty cheap for a pool cue, but $40 is very expensive for this particular cue. Yes, it's really bad. All this leaves our Graphstrike scoring just 1.5 stars out of 5 for value. And finally, it's time to award the Viper Graphstrike with an official Average Joe's rating. And for this, we take the very underwhelming scores from across our 5 test categories, and we'll use that to calculate our average. And it will likely come as no surprise that the Graphstrike is not going to fare well here, bringing it on home with a frankly pitiful Average Joe's rating of 1.5 stars. Playing with this cue has been a painful experience, and this particular model does nothing positive for the perception of the Viper brand, which really is a shame because Viper do make some excellent budget cues, excluding this one. So, the Viper Graphstrike question remains, should you buy one? Well, as you may well have guessed, the simple answer is going to be absolutely not. Now, if you are obsessed with these composite style cues, first of all, I would say don't be. They are definitely not worth it. However, if you really want one of these composite cues, we have done a review of the GSE Cue, which is Amazon's #1 best-selling pool cue. And just like the Viper Graphstrike here, it's not the best cue in the world. However, it does have a layered leather tip and has a softer and more responsive hit than what you'll find on the Graphstrike. The GSE is certainly not an outstanding cue, but if you are obsessed with these composite style cues, that's a better buy than what we have here. And a fantastic alternative for this cue, especially if you want to stick with the Viper brand, would be the Viper Underground series. And the Underground series is a more traditional maple construction cue. And the Underground series is definitely a very solid option if you are on a tight budget. They are a cheap cue that you can actually have a decent game of pool with, unlike the Graphstrike. And it's worth mentioning that the Viper Underground series is available in a large range of different designs. And because there is such a large selection available, it is very common to be able to pick up a Viper Underground at prices very, very similar to this. The official price is around $60 to $65, but have a look on Amazon, you will find certain models all the time $43, $44, $45, a much better buy than what we have here. And please remember that if you are interested in buying a Graphstrike, which you're probably not, or perhaps the GSE, or more importantly the Viper Underground series, then we will be adding links to all of those into the video description. So if you like what you see here and we've helped you out, please help us in return. Be sure to click on our Amazon links. So thank you very much for watching. Before you leave us, we always ask you take 1 second out of your busy day just to be sure to hit that like button for us. It really does help us out. And whilst you're there, why not also click on the subscribe option. Switch on notifications and you'll find out about all of our upcoming videos. So thank you for joining us here at Average Joe's Pool. Until next time, the horror. The horror.